They thought they had stopped an ordinary truck driver at a gas station. They had no idea they had just confronted the man who was watching their every move. The words would echo through the investigation that followed. But on that quiet evening outside a small Texas highway town, nobody knew that a simple encounter under the glow of a gas station sign was about to expose a truth hidden for months. The night air was warm, carrying the distant sound of passing cars and the steady hum of engines along Interstate 35. Bright fluorescent lights reflected across rows of parked vehicles as travelers stopped for fuel, coffee, and a few minutes of rest before continuing their journeys. Among them was Marcus Reed, a 38-year-old black truck driver who appeared to be exactly what everyone saw at first glance. A hard-working man taking a short break from a long route. His 18-wheeler sat beside the pumps, its trailer carrying supplies across state lines, while Marcus stood quietly with a cup of coffee in his hand. He wore a simple jacket, work boots, and the tired expression of someone who had spent many hours behind the wheel. To anyone watching, he was just another professional driver passing through. But Marcus had learned a long time ago that people often judged what they saw before they understood what they didn't see. He had spent years traveling across America's highways, visiting towns big and small, and he knew that a person could be overlooked in a crowd while carrying a story far more important than anyone imagined. That evening, Marcus wasn't just completing a delivery route. He was following a trail of information that had taken months to uncover. Hidden behind the identity of a truck driver was another responsibility, one that required patience, discipline, and absolute focus. Marcus Reed was a special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, assigned to quietly examine reports of misconduct connected to a local law enforcement unit. He wasn't there to create a scene. He wasn't there to make accusations. He was there to observe, document, and understand the truth. But before the truth could come out, he needed to see what happened when people believed nobody important was watching. As Marcus closed the door of his truck and checked his route documents, 2 police officers entered the gas station parking area. Their patrol vehicle rolled slowly across the pavement before stopping nearby. Officer Daniel Whitmore stepped out first, followed by his partner. Whitmore was known around the department as someone who believed confidence came from control. After years wearing a badge, he carried himself like every situation belonged to him. He looked toward Marcus, then toward the truck, and began walking over. Marcus noticed the change in the atmosphere immediately. The conversations around the station became quieter. A few customers glanced over before returning to their own business. Marcus had seen that look before, the moment when assumptions formed before questions were even asked. The officer approached and requested information about the truck and the delivery route. Marcus calmly provided what was needed. His voice remained respectful. His posture remained steady. He understood something important. Sometimes the most powerful response was simply allowing people to reveal themselves. Whitmore looked over the documents and continued asking questions. There was nothing unusual about Marcus, nothing suspicious about the truck, and nothing that suggested wrongdoing. Yet the officer continued searching for a reason to doubt him. Marcus watched carefully, not with anger, but with the quiet attention of someone gathering pieces of a much larger puzzle. What Officer Whitmore didn't know was that every assumption, every careless comment, and every decision made in that parking lot was becoming part of something bigger. He believed he was questioning a truck driver. He didn't realize he was giving answers to the very investigator who had been looking for the truth all along. The most dangerous moments are not always the loudest ones. Sometimes, they begin with a quiet question, a suspicious glance, and a decision made before the truth has a chance to speak. For Marcus Reed, that moment had arrived under the bright lights of a roadside gas station, where a routine stop had slowly turned into a test of patience and character. Officer Daniel Whitmore stood beside the truck, holding Marcus's documents while looking for something that did not exist. The officer's eyes moved between the paperwork and the vehicle as if he expected to find a problem hidden somewhere. Marcus remained calm, answering each question clearly and respectfully. He knew that situations like this were not only about what was being asked. They were about what people revealed when they believed they had complete control. For years, Marcus had studied human behavior as part of his work with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He understood that pressure often exposed what people try to hide. A person's words, their tone, and the choices they made when nobody challenged them could reveal more than any official statement. That was why Marcus did not rush. He did not argue. He simply watched. The small town outside Austin, Texas, looked peaceful from the outside. The gas station was surrounded by open roads, quiet neighborhoods, and businesses that closed early in the evening. But behind that peaceful image was a growing number of complaints involving certain members of the local police department. Reports had described patterns of unfair treatment, questionable stops, and decisions that appeared to target people before evidence existed. Marcus had been assigned to look deeper into those concerns. His mission was not built around one person. It was about understanding whether there was a larger pattern. Officer Whitmore, however, believed he was dealing with just another driver passing through town. He did not know that Marcus had already spent weeks reviewing reports connected to his department. He did not know that the questions he was asking were becoming part of a much larger picture. And most importantly, he did not know that Marcus had been waiting for a moment exactly like this. Inside the gas station, customers continued buying snacks and drinks, unaware of the significance of the conversation happening outside. A cashier behind the counter occasionally looked through the window, noticing the tension between the officer and the truck driver. Marcus noticed those small details. The way people looked away. The way silence filled the space between strangers. The way an ordinary evening could change when someone was judged before they were understood. He remembered why he had taken this assignment in the first place. Behind every report was a person. Behind every statistic was a real experience. And behind every complaint was someone hoping that the system would listen. Officer Whitmore eventually handed the documents back, but his expression remained doubtful. He asked Marcus more questions about where he was coming from, where he was going, and why he was in the area. Marcus answered without hesitation. His responses were simple because there was nothing to hide. Yet something about his calmness seemed to bother the officer. Whitmore was used to people becoming nervous when questioned. He was used to seeing fear, confusion, or frustration. But Marcus gave him none of those reactions. Instead, he stood there with the quiet confidence of someone who knew the truth would eventually speak for itself. What Whitmore saw as weakness was actually discipline. What he saw as silence was preparation. And what he saw as an ordinary truck driver was a man who had spent months following a trail that led directly to people standing in front of him. As the night continued, Marcus returned to his truck and looked across the parking lot. The investigation was not over. In fact, it was only beginning. Because sometimes the person asking the questions is not the person holding the power. Sometimes the person being judged is the one collecting the evidence. And on that quiet Texas highway, Marcus Reed was about to discover just how far some people would go when they believed nobody was watching. The truth often hides in the smallest details. A name written on a document, a message left unread, a conversation that seems ordinary until someone realizes every word mattered. For Marcus Reed, the events at the gas station were not just another uncomfortable encounter on the road. They were another piece of a much larger investigation that had been quietly building for months. After Officer Daniel Whitmore walked away from the truck, Marcus remained still for a moment, watching the patrol vehicle disappear into the distance. The bright lights of the gas station reflected across the windshield of his 18-wheeler, creating long shadows across the dashboard. To anyone passing by, it looked like the situation was over. But Marcus knew better. In his line of work, the first interaction often revealed the most important information. He climbed into the cab of his truck, closed the door, and reached for a small notebook hidden among his travel documents. The pages contained observations, dates, and details that connected different reports from across the county. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that would attract attention. Just facts. Facts that, when placed together, started to reveal a troubling pattern. Marcus remembered his first briefing at the Federal Bureau of Investigation office several weeks earlier. The assignment had seemed simple on paper. Review complaints involving the local police department and determine whether certain officers had violated professional standards. But as the files grew, the situation became more complicated. Several people had described similar experiences. They spoke about feeling ignored, judged, or treated differently before anyone had taken the time to understand their circumstances. Marcus knew investigations were not built on emotions alone. They required patience, evidence, and careful observation. That was why he chose to go undercover as a truck driver. People often behaved differently when they believed they were not being evaluated. A person might reveal their true attitude when they thought the person standing in front of them had no influence, no authority, and no ability to challenge them. Marcus understood that his appearance as a regular driver gave him access to moments that official interviews never could. He could see how people acted when they believed nobody important was paying attention. His assignment partner, Agent Sarah Mitchell, had reminded him before he started the operation. The goal is not to prove what we think. The goal is to discover what is true. Marcus carried those words with him every day. He knew that justice depended on facts, not assumptions. That evening, after leaving the gas station parking lot, Marcus pulled onto the highway and continued his route. The road stretched ahead beneath the dark Texas sky, with the headlights of passing vehicles moving like streams of light. Inside the cab, everything was quiet except for the steady sound of the engine. But Marcus's mind was focused. He replayed the conversation with Officer Whitmore. The unnecessary questions. The suspicion without evidence. The way the officer seemed determined to find a reason for doubt. Marcus did not allow anger to control him. Anger could cloud judgment. Discipline created clarity. He had learned that lesson long before becoming an FBI agent. The next morning, Marcus sent a secure update to Sarah. He described the encounter carefully, including every detail that could help build a complete picture. Sarah reviewed the information and recognized something important. Officer Whitmore was not just a name appearing in complaints. He was connected to several reports they had already been examining. The gas station encounter was not the beginning of the story. It was confirmation that their investigation was moving closer to the truth. Meanwhile, Officer Whitmore returned to his department believing the night had ended like any other shift. He had no reason to suspect that the quiet truck driver had documented everything. He had no idea that his actions had placed him closer to the center of an investigation. And he certainly did not know that the man he underestimated was not searching for trouble. He was searching for answers. Because Marcus Reed had learned something throughout his years of service. The people who believe they are invisible are often the ones who reveal the most. And soon, the hidden truth behind the department would begin to come into the light. The following morning arrived quietly over the small Texas town, but beneath the calm surface, something much bigger was beginning to move. While most people started their daily routines, Marcus Reed was already reviewing information that could change everything about the investigation. The world saw him as a truck driver beginning another long route. They saw the 18-wheeler, the work jacket, and the tired expression of a man who spent countless hours on the highway. They did not see the years of training, the careful preparation, or the responsibility he carried as a Federal Bureau of Investigation special agent. Inside the cab of his truck, Marcus sat with a cup of coffee beside him and reviewed the notes from the previous night. He did not focus on emotions. He focused on details. The exact time of the encounter. The questions that were asked. The way Officer Daniel Whitmore approached the situation. Every small piece mattered because investigations were built one fact at a time. Across town, the police department continued operating as usual. Officers walked through the station, reports were filed, and calls came in from residents needing assistance. To most people, it looked like any other morning. But inside the department, there was a history that Marcus had been carefully studying. Complaints had been collected over months. Some involved questionable decisions. Others involved people who felt they were not treated fairly. Individually, each report could be dismissed as a misunderstanding. But together, they created a pattern that demanded attention. Marcus knew that patterns were rarely obvious at first. They appeared slowly, hidden between separate moments and forgotten conversations. That was why he had chosen patience over speed. He was not looking for a dramatic confrontation. He was looking for the truth. Later that day, Marcus met with Agent Sarah Mitchell at a quiet location away from the main roads. Sarah placed several documents on the table between them, each one connected to the ongoing review. "Something is becoming clear," she said. "The reports are connected in ways we did not expect." Marcus looked through the information carefully. Names, dates, locations, and statements began forming a larger picture. He recognized something important. The issue was not just about one officer making one decision. It was about a culture where certain people believed their authority protected them from consequences. Marcus had seen this before in other investigations. Power could influence people to forget the purpose behind the responsibility they carried. A badge was supposed to represent service, trust, and accountability. It was never supposed to become a reason to ignore fairness. That evening, Marcus returned to the highway, continuing his role as a truck driver. The sun was setting over the Texas landscape, painting the road with orange and gold light. The peaceful scenery created a strange contrast with the seriousness of his mission. To the people passing by, he was just another driver heading toward another destination. Nobody knew that the man behind the wheel was carrying information that could challenge powerful people. Nobody knew that every mile brought him closer to understanding the truth. Meanwhile, Officer Whitmore continued his regular duties, unaware of the investigation surrounding him. He spoke with other officers and moved through his day with the same confidence he had always shown. He believed the encounter at the gas station was insignificant, just another interaction with another person passing through town. But Marcus knew something Whitmore did not. The smallest moments often revealed the biggest truths. A careless assumption, a dismissive question, a decision made without considering who was standing in front of you. Those moments could expose character more clearly than any official statement. As the investigation continued, Marcus prepared for the next step. He knew the hardest part was not discovering information. The hardest part was proving it beyond doubt. Because justice was not built on rumors or guesses. It was built on evidence. And soon, the people who thought they were in control would have to face the reality that someone had been watching, listening, and documenting everything from the very beginning. The most revealing moments are often the ones people think nobody will remember. A single conversation, a quiet decision, a few words spoken with confidence because someone believes there will never be consequences. But Marcus Reed knew that every moment mattered. Every detail could become the difference between a hidden truth and a forgotten story. 3 days after the encounter at the gas station, Marcus continued moving through Texas as he maintained his cover as a long-haul truck driver. The highways stretched for miles beneath the open sky, with small towns appearing and disappearing along the route. To strangers, he was simply another professional driver carrying supplies across the country. They saw a man focused on his schedule, his deliveries, and the road ahead. They did not see the investigation unfolding behind the scenes. Inside his truck, Marcus reviewed the latest information from Agent Sarah Mitchell. The reports were becoming clearer. Several residents had described similar experiences involving the same group of officers. The details were different, but the feeling behind each report was familiar. People felt unheard. They felt judged before they had the opportunity to explain themselves. Marcus read each statement carefully, understanding that behind every document was a person who wanted to be treated fairly. He had always believed that investigations were not just about collecting evidence. They were about understanding people. That belief was one of the reasons he became an FBI agent. He wanted to find the truth, even when the truth was hidden behind assumptions and silence. Meanwhile, Officer Daniel Whitmore continued his normal routine at the police department. He had no idea that the encounter at the gas station had become an important part of a federal investigation. To him, Marcus was just a truck driver who happened to pass through town. Someone easy to overlook. Someone unlikely to challenge his decisions. But that assumption was exactly what Marcus had been studying. The belief that certain people could be dismissed without consequence. The belief that some voices mattered less than others. During a follow-up review, Sarah discovered another important connection. Officer Whitmore's name appeared in several internal records connected to previous complaints. None of them alone proved misconduct. But together, they showed a pattern that needed deeper examination. Sarah looked across the table at Marcus. "The problem is bigger than one encounter," she said. Marcus nodded. He already understood. The gas station was not the beginning. It was a window into something larger. That evening, Marcus returned to the same highway route where he had spent countless hours driving. The sun was lowering behind the Texas horizon, and the reflection of the orange sky covered the windshield of his truck. For a moment, everything felt peaceful. But Marcus knew that important changes rarely happened in moments of comfort. They happened when people were willing to look closely at uncomfortable truths. He thought about Officer Whitmore's confidence, the certainty in his voice. The way he believed his position gave him the final word. Marcus had seen that attitude before. It was the dangerous idea that authority meant never having to answer questions. But Marcus also knew something else. True authority was not about control. It was about responsibility. A person who carried power had a duty to use it carefully. As the investigation moved forward, Marcus prepared for the next stage. He needed more than observations. He needed a complete picture. He needed to understand how decisions were made, who approved them, and whether others inside the department knew what was happening. The answers would not come overnight. They would require patience. They would require precision. And they would require Marcus to continue walking through the world as someone nobody expected to matter. The next morning, Marcus stopped at another roadside location to complete a routine delivery check. While reviewing his route, he received a secure message from Sarah. New information had appeared. Something connected the gas station encounter to a larger pattern of behavior inside the department. Marcus looked at the message quietly, knowing the investigation had reached a turning point. The people involved still believed they were protecting their secrets. They believed the person watching them was just another driver on the road. They did not realize that the truth was already moving closer. And soon, the same people who underestimated Marcus Reed would have to answer one important question. What happens when the person you ignored was the person who had been searching for the truth all along? The truth was getting closer, but Marcus Reed knew that the final steps of any investigation were often the most important. Discovering a pattern was one thing. Proving it was another. And proving it required something more powerful than suspicion. It required evidence that could not be ignored. As the sun rose over Texas the next morning, Marcus parked his truck at a quiet rest area outside the city. The highway was already alive with movement. Commercial trucks passed in the distance. Families traveled toward new destinations. And the world continued moving as if nothing unusual was happening. But inside Marcus's truck, a major investigation was entering a new phase. He opened his secure device and reviewed the latest information from Agent Sarah Mitchell. The files contained details from multiple reports, each one adding another piece to the story they had been trying to understand. Marcus studied the information carefully. He did not search for a reason to accuse someone. He searched for the truth behind every decision, every action, and every choice made by those involved. That was what separated an investigation from a judgment. Sarah had discovered that Officer Daniel Whitmore was connected to several situations that raised concerns. The reports showed a repeated pattern of people feeling dismissed before their side of the story was considered. Marcus understood that patterns did not appear overnight. They were created through small choices repeated over time. A person who ignored one warning sign might ignore another. A system that failed to listen once might fail again. Marcus looked out through the windshield and thought about the people behind those reports. He imagined the frustration of someone trying to explain their experience while feeling like nobody wanted to hear them. That was why this investigation mattered. It was not about proving one person wrong. It was about making sure the truth had a chance to be heard. Later that afternoon, Marcus met Sarah at a small office away from the police department. The room was quiet, filled with documents, notes, and information collected during the investigation. Sarah placed a new folder on the table. Inside were records that connected several incidents more closely than before. This changes the direction of the investigation, Sarah explained. Marcus read through the details slowly. The information suggested that the problems were not isolated moments. They were connected through decisions made by multiple people. The gas station encounter had become an important example because it showed how quickly assumptions could shape behavior. Marcus remembered standing beside his truck while Officer Whitmore questioned him. At the time, the officer believed he was simply dealing with someone who had no influence and no ability to challenge him. But that assumption revealed exactly what Marcus needed to understand. It showed how people acted when they believed there was no reason to be careful. That evening, Marcus returned to his role on the road. He drove through small Texas towns, passing farms, businesses, and highways that stretched endlessly ahead. The ordinary appearance of his life was the reason his undercover work was effective. Nobody expected the person delivering goods across state lines to be gathering information that could change an entire department. Nobody expected the quiet driver to be the person asking the most important questions. Meanwhile, inside the police department, Officer Whitmore remained confident. He continued speaking with coworkers and carrying himself as though nothing had changed. He believed the situation at the gas station had disappeared. He believed Marcus Reed was a person from a brief encounter who would never matter again. But what Whitmore did not understand was that Marcus had never been trying to become the center of attention. He was trying to uncover what happened when nobody was paying attention. Days passed, and the investigation continued growing stronger. Marcus and Sarah carefully organized the information, making sure every detail was verified. They knew that real justice required patience. It required a commitment to facts, even when emotions were strong. Because the goal was not simply to expose mistakes. The goal was to create accountability. And as Marcus prepared for the next stage of the operation, one thing became clear. The people who believed they had control over the situation were slowly losing it. They were still looking at Marcus as a truck driver passing through town. They had no idea they were standing in front of the person who would eventually reveal the truth they had spent so long hiding. The moment before the truth is revealed is often the quietest moment of all. Before the questions are answered, before the hidden facts come into the light, there is always a final period of uncertainty where people continue believing the story they created for themselves. For Officer Daniel Whitmore, that moment had arrived. He still believed Marcus Reed was nothing more than a truck driver who had briefly crossed his path. He had no idea that the person he underestimated was preparing to reveal the reality behind the investigation. Over the next several days, Marcus continued collecting information while maintaining his everyday routine. He drove along Texas highways, delivered supplies, and stopped at locations that made him appear like any other professional driver. The disguise was simple, but that was exactly why it worked. People rarely paid attention to someone they believed had no influence. Marcus understood that perception could hide the truth. At the Federal Bureau of Investigation office, Agent Sarah Mitchell continued organizing the evidence they had gathered. Every report, every statement, and every recorded detail had to be reviewed carefully. They were not looking for a dramatic moment. They were building a complete picture. Marcus knew that the strongest investigations were not built on emotion. They were built on facts that could stand on their own. One evening, Sarah called Marcus with an update. New information had connected Officer Whitmore to several decisions that required further review. The connection was becoming harder to ignore. Marcus listened carefully as Sarah explained the details. The gas station encounter was no longer just an isolated event. It represented a larger concern about how certain people were being treated when they had no way to challenge the situation. Marcus looked out at the highway in front of him. The passing headlights reflected across the windshield as he considered everything they had discovered. He thought about the first time he met Whitmore. The officer had looked at him and immediately formed an opinion. Before understanding who Marcus was, before knowing his background, before hearing his explanation, the decision had already been made. That was the moment Marcus had been studying. Not just the questions being asked, but the assumptions behind them. The following morning, Marcus returned to the small Texas town where the investigation had started. He parked his truck near a quiet area outside the main road and waited for instructions from Sarah. The town looked the same as before. The gas station lights were still shining. Cars continued stopping for fuel. People continued with their daily lives. But Marcus knew the meaning of that place had changed. It was no longer just a gas station. It had become the location where important information was uncovered. Later that day, Sarah arrived with the final pieces they needed before taking the next step. She looked at Marcus and said, "We have enough to show what happened." Marcus remained silent for a moment. He understood what those words meant. The investigation had reached the point where the truth could no longer remain hidden. But Marcus also knew that the purpose was never revenge. It was accountability. It was about making sure the people affected by unfair treatment were finally heard. Meanwhile, Officer Whitmore continued his shift without knowing what was approaching. He spoke with confidence, believing his actions had no consequences. He believed the people he questioned would simply move on. He believed the situation would disappear with time. But time had done the opposite. Time had allowed the truth to grow stronger. Every decision he made had become part of a larger story. Every assumption had created another piece of evidence. And now, the person he thought was powerless was the person holding the answers. Marcus prepared for the next step with the same calm focus he had shown from the beginning. He adjusted his jacket, looked over the information one final time, and knew the moment they had been working toward had arrived. Soon, Officer Whitmore would learn that the quiet truck driver at the gas station was never just a person passing through. He was the person who had been watching, documenting, and waiting for the right moment to let the truth speak. The truth had been waiting quietly in the background, hidden behind ordinary moments and simple decisions. But now, after weeks of careful investigation, the time had come for those hidden details to finally be seen. Marcus Reed sat across from Agent Sarah Mitchell in a quiet conference room, surrounded by the evidence they had carefully collected. The documents on the table represented more than just reports and records. They represented the voices of people who had spent months hoping someone would listen. Marcus looked through the information one final time, making sure every detail was accurate. He knew this moment was important, but he also knew that emotions could never replace facts. Justice depended on patience. It depended on the truth being strong enough to stand on its own. Sarah placed the final report on the table and explained that the investigation team had completed their review. The pattern was clear. The concerns surrounding Officer Daniel Whitmore and several decisions within the department could no longer be ignored. The information showed repeated situations where assumptions appeared to come before understanding. Marcus remembered the night at the gas station. He remembered standing beside his truck while Whitmore questioned him. At that moment, the officer believed he was in control. He believed Marcus was just another person passing through town. But the truth was completely different. Marcus had not been looking for an argument. He had been looking for answers. The next morning, Marcus returned to the police department area with Sarah and other investigators. The atmosphere was different from the previous visits. There was no anger. There was no desire to create chaos. There was simply a focus on accountability. Officer Whitmore was informed that federal investigators needed to speak with him regarding the ongoing review. For the first time, the confidence he had carried for so long began to disappear. He looked at the people standing in front of him and realized that the situation was much larger than he expected. Sarah introduced Marcus properly, not as a truck driver, not as someone who had been questioned at a gas station, but as Special Agent Marcus Reed of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The room became quiet. The person Whitmore thought he understood was someone he never truly knew. Marcus did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The evidence already spoke for itself. He explained that the investigation was never about creating enemies. It was about understanding what happened and making sure the truth was recognized. He explained that every person deserved to be treated with fairness and respect, regardless of their background, occupation, or appearance. Whitmore listened as the details of the investigation were presented. The reports, the patterns, the decisions that had been reviewed carefully over time. Each piece connected to create a picture that could no longer be dismissed. The confidence that once filled the officer's voice was replaced by silence as he realized the person he had underestimated was the person who had uncovered everything. Outside the department, news of the investigation began spreading through the community. People who had once felt ignored started to believe that their experiences mattered. They saw that accountability was possible when the truth was handled with care and determination. Marcus watched from a distance as the process continued. He did not feel satisfaction from seeing someone face consequences. Instead, he felt relief knowing that the system had a chance to improve. For him, that was always the purpose. A badge was not meant to create distance between people. It was meant to represent trust. And trust could only exist when everyone was treated with dignity. As the sun set over Texas that evening, Marcus returned to his truck one last time. The same highway that had carried him through the investigation stretched ahead. The same roads. The same towns. But everything felt different. The man who had once been overlooked was now the person who helped reveal the truth. And Officer Whitmore finally understood the lesson Marcus had known from the beginning. Power was never measured by how many people feared you. True power came from protecting the truth when others tried to ignore it. The road ahead looked the same, but Marcus Reed knew that some journeys changed the person who traveled them. The highways of Texas continued stretching across the landscape, carrying thousands of people toward their destinations every day. Trucks moved between cities, families traveled toward new memories, and small towns continued their routines. Life appeared normal, but behind the scenes, a story of accountability had reached a turning point. In the days following the investigation, Marcus returned to the role that had allowed him to uncover the truth. He continued driving his truck, visiting communities, and seeing the world from behind the windshield. To strangers, he was still the same quiet driver they had seen before. But Marcus knew that the most important changes were not always visible. Sometimes, they happened when people finally understood that every person deserved to be heard. Agent Sarah Mitchell continued working with the investigation team to ensure that the information collected was properly reviewed. The process was careful and deliberate because true justice was not about creating a dramatic ending. It was about making sure every decision was supported by facts and every person involved had the opportunity to be treated fairly. Marcus thought back to the first night at the gas station. He remembered the bright lights above the pumps, the sound of passing vehicles, and the moment when someone looked at him and decided who they thought he was before knowing anything about him. That memory stayed with him, not because of the encounter itself, but because it represented something larger. It represented the importance of seeing people as individuals instead of assumptions. The community also began to change. People who once believed their concerns would disappear without anyone listening started to see that speaking the truth mattered. They saw that accountability could happen when people were willing to look deeper and ask difficult questions. For Marcus, that was the most meaningful result of the investigation. It was never about one person winning and another person losing. It was about creating a system where fairness had a stronger voice. Officer Daniel Whitmore faced the consequences of the investigation and had to answer questions about the decisions he made. The confidence he once carried was replaced by reflection. He had spent years believing that authority alone gave him control, but he learned an important lesson. A position does not define a person. The choices they make do. Marcus never forgot that lesson either. During his years with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, he had seen many situations where people were judged too quickly. He had seen how a single assumption could create a barrier between people. But he had also seen how truth could rebuild trust when someone had the courage to search for it. One evening, Marcus stopped his truck near an open stretch of highway and watched the sun disappear beyond the Texas horizon. The same roads that once carried him through a secret investigation now represented something different. They represented a reminder that change could begin anywhere. Even at a quiet gas station, even during an ordinary conversation, even when someone believed nobody important was watching. Marcus knew that justice was not always loud. Sometimes it arrived quietly through patience, evidence, and people who refused to ignore the truth. The world had seen a truck driver standing beside his vehicle. They had seen someone they thought they understood, but they never saw the determination, experience, and purpose behind that person. And that was the lesson Marcus carried forward. Because the greatest mistake anyone can make is believing that a person's appearance tells the whole story. Sometimes the person standing quietly in front of you is the person who holds the answers. Sometimes the person you overlook is the person who helps bring the truth into the light. He never needed people to fear him. He only needed them to understand one thing. Respect is not given because of power. Respect is earned through the way we choose to treat others.